Good afternoon, welcome to Lunch and Learn. How lovely to see our virtual studio audience on Zoom, all kitted out in their virtual Purim costumes or physical Purim costumes. And I mean, you can't see that if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, but that's why you've got to come and join the party on Zoom. That's why this is the place to be. Okie dokie, guys. A little bit of a summary then of Parashat Tetzaveh. So last week we read about the what the Mishkan is going to look like. That was Parashat Terumah. And now Tetzaveh we read about, in the main, we read about the uniform of the Kohanim and also in particular the Kohen Gadol. So that is the main bulk of what we talk about. The Kohen. Oh, pardon me. We all right? So the Kohanim when they would serve in the Mishkan or in the Beit HaMikdash, they would have a uniform comprised of 4 items of clothing. They would have a turban. They would have look at that. Welcome, Rita.
I couldn't get in, but I'm okay.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Did you come dressed up, or you realised that we were all dressed up and then you went to find something?
I realised you all have a hat on, something like that's fine.
Brilliant. Well, that's good. Getting in the Purim spirit. So, so what were we saying? Yeah. So the Kohanim would wear a turban. They would wear a kind of tunic. They would wear some kind of trouser-like parts to their uniform, and then they would have, I don't know why I'm doing this, you can't see that on Zoom, you can see it on YouTube though, they would have a belt, a sash that would go around them, and that was the main priestly uniform that they would use to serve
Rabbi,
in Beit HaMikdash.
Why a turban?
Why a turban? Well, I say turban, it's some kind of head covering, which I would describe as a turban. I don't know that it was necessarily styled in the same way that the Sikhs would wear a turban.
Yes, exactly. That's what I had in my mind. Thinking.
But it was some kind of hat, some kind of head covering.
Made from a talus or made from a...
Made from... Good question. What are they making it out of?
Oh, not to worry. Sorry, it just interested me.
No, it's all right.
Hats seem to be the thing today.
Don't know.
No props.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I should know. I imagine it was linen, but I can't say that with a level of certainty.
Rabbi, can I have a question?
Yeah.
How different was what they were wearing to what the average Israelite would be wearing at the time? So what was extra? It was extra.
Well, the whole uniform was extra. They wouldn't wear their own clothes. They would actually leave these items of clothing in the Beit HaMikdash. They had lockers and things like that, so they would get changed from their regular clothing into these specific uniforms.
No, I didn't mean.
Oh, you didn't mean that.
How different is what they were wearing from what they normally would wear? That's what I meant.
That would presuppose that Rabbi Nick has any idea what the fashion trends were at the time. I'm gonna go with very, you know, we would be familiar with the items of clothing if we were in particularly hot old Arab climates. Imagine they wore robes and tunics and that kind of thing. I imagine with airspace underneath. I'm picturing. I think that's that was
very nice, Josie.
It's good. We're all in the Purim spirit. Except for Yanir, miserable, sitting there in the background, camera off. And you can't even tell that my dad's turned his camera off because you can see his thumbnail. But yeah, so I imagine they had that kind of fashion sense. Would that make sense? That seem logical?
I just wondered how they would stand out from the general people who would be,
I think their clothing was white. I think that was one way in which they stood out. So they definitely stood out in that regards. And it's interesting actually, because the items of clothing that we bury people in. I mean, I can only speak for the men. I don't know what they do for women, but the items of clothing that a man is buried in is modelled on the uniform of the Kohanim. They're buried in a pair of trousers and a robe and a cap of some kind and a sash. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
I always thought they were buried in the Talisim.
And the tallis as well, yes. But they're wearing clothing which is modelled on the items of a Kohen's uniform. So yeah, that's the fourth thing, and then the additional items that the Kohen Gadol would wear. He would wear 4 extra items. He would wear something called an ephod, which is difficult to describe. It's like an apron with some straps over it, and they would wear a breastplate called the choshen, which had the stones, 12 stones representing the 12 tribes. They would wear a tzitz, which is a head plate. That's a really good name for it. And all of the translations that I see on the website that we use, they always call it a frontlet, and I'm like, what's a frontlet? But a head plate, that makes perfect sense now. So they wore a head plate made out of gold, thin gold, which would have the words Kadosh LaHashem engraved on it. They had a different type of turban, which was a bit kind of fluffier and rounder, and then the head plate would be attached to that. I'll show you this picture that I've got here. And then the final thing that they wore was called the me'il, which was a particular kind of robe. And at the bottom of the me'il, bottom of this robe, were pomegranates and bells, and the bells would actually tinkle. And any time the Kohen Gadol was walking, people would hear that the Kohen Gadol was approaching. And there's a beautiful idea there that was to encourage people to stop talking Lashon Hara. It's kind of like the constant reminder. I guess it's a little bit similar to having bells on our Sefer Torah. I might just go and close that door if you'll excuse me for a second. Gosh, and I thought my children were loud. So I think it's a similar concept, by the way, of why we have bells on our Sefer Torah as well. It's to alert people when it's being moved around, so that people can fix their behavior as quickly as possible. So if I can just show you a little picture here in the Art Scroll Chumash of the Kohen Gadol's, where are we? There we are. Of the Kohen Gadol's uniform. You've got that turban over there. You've got the breastplate on the front. You've got the me'il, and you've got the head plate that I was describing. Oh, look at that! Get right up close there, and we'll show everyone on. Oh, God, now I can't see where I'm going. There we are. Now everyone on YouTube has seen that. Millions of people that watch this on YouTube will know what the Kohen Gadol look like. So there we go. A little bit then on Parashat Kitzavet. In the main, it really does talk about the Kohanim and the uniform that they wore. We then read about the inauguration ritual to get the process started on having the Kohanim working in the Mishkan. There was a 7-day installation process before they would work in the Mishkan. And you have to remember, back then it was just Aaron and his sons. He had 4 sons, and then we read later about how 2 of them passed away. So it's a very small team that we're talking about. originally in the Mishkan. Certainly by the time we get to the Beis HaMikdash, the kingdom of priests has rapidly enlarged, and we then read how there were 24 different families who would be on a rotation of shifts each week throughout the year. So it gets bigger, but it starts off very, very small. And then finally, we read about the sacrifices. We read about the sacrifices that were brought every day, the Tamid offering. And we read about the incense altar, the ketoret. And maybe one little interesting thing on the incense. So every single day they would take 15 ingredients. It was a very specific balance of these 15 ingredients, and only one family knew how to make this particular incense mixture. And then they would offer up some of these spices, as it were, each day on this special altar, and had a beautiful smell, we are told. But if you go through these 15 ingredients, we actually read about one of the ingredients which did not smell particularly appetizing. I'm trying to remember which one it is, but it's not springing to mind as I sit here. But there was one ingredient that really didn't smell nice. But when it was burnt with the other 14 ingredients, so then the whole thing smelled beautiful. So the question is, why would they have this rather foul-smelling ingredient then in this incense mixture? Let's just take 15 ingredients which smell beautiful. And the message that is there to teach us is that actually a community, the Jewish people, is comprised of all different types of people. And some of them might be a little bit foul-smelling, as it were, metaphorically, if that's the right word. But when they all come together as a united people, and we recognize the dignity of difference. Oh, I've just thought of that brand new phrase. Never heard that one before. Dignity of difference. There we go. So when we recognize the dignity of difference, when we realize that everyone brings something different to the table, and we realize that we are one combined whole, then the entire Jewish people smell beautiful. Even if as individuals, we may be on varying levels of behavior. So a nice little message there from the Ketores, I think. And that's Parshat Tetzaveh. Let's dive into Pirkei Avot. I would love to speak about Purim as well, but Purim's tonight, folks. And yeah, one very quick thing on the Megillah. I don't really want to share because otherwise I lose my sermon for tomorrow afternoon. So. But suffice it to say, we if you remember, we did some nuggets on the Megillah last year, talking about how everything comes together, the disparate coincidences which come to teach us that in life nothing is a coincidence, and actually Hashem is pulling those strings all the time, and we as Jews have to believe that everything that we go through is ultimately. With Hashem has a reason and Hashem has a plan, and Purim is the time to think on that and the time to reflect on that, so that message is as relevant today as it ever was. Let's just say that. But I wish we could talk more about it. But let's do a little bit of a Mishnah, and then we can always come back to Purim if we want. So you guys can run the show today and tell me if you want to go for 2 Mishnayot. Or just to go for 1, but they're getting shorter as we reach the end of chapter 4, by the way. So
how many chapters are there?
There are 6 chapters. There are 6 chapters in Pirkei Avot. So we've got some way to go. Yeah. There's according to my book, there's 29 just in this chapter, but they get short. So we're going to plow through some of these quite quickly. Okie dokie, guys. Let's get it up on the screen. All right, everyone can see that, and everyone can see it on Zoom as well?
Yeah.
Phantasmalogical. So, we are going to do Mishnah Oh, we're in the middle, aren't we? No. Ooh, where are we up to? We're up to
number
Mishnah
13.
13, but are we in the middle of Mishnah 13?
No, we finished 12.
We finished 12. Did we start the beginning of 13?
No.
No, we haven't done that yet.
Okay, because that is split into two in my book. So we'll start with the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Heve Zahir b'Talmud, Shashigas Talmud Ola Zadon. So Rabbi Yehuda says, this is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, who is one of the 5 students that we've talked about in the past, the 5 principal students of Rabbi Akiva. He's a very popular guy, Rabbi Yehuda, and there are hundreds of halachot scattered across the Talmud quoted in his name. So he's all over the place. He was the keynote speaker, let's just say that. So he says, Heve Zahir b'Talmud, Sheshigigas Talmud Ola Zadon, that you should be meticulous. Does it say meticulous in study on the screen? Be careful. Okay, Zahir, be careful in study, be meticulous in your studies, because an error in your study, a careless misinterpretation, can cause, what does it say there? Counts as deliberate sin. Or translated in another way, careless misinterpretation is considered tantamount, to willful transgression. It is considered tantamount to willful transgression. So important stuff over here, and there's not a tremendous amount necessarily that I found on this. So I'm certainly open to hear people's interpretations, but when you are spreading your wisdom, you have to make sure that it's authentic. You have to make sure that it is accurate. You have to make sure that you are enough of, not an expert, but well versed enough to not be misleading people. So, as a rabbi, this is hugely important. If you interpret verses, or if you interpret halachot in the wrong way, you could be misleading your entire community to be acting inappropriately. Do we dare give practical public examples of this on public recordings? But as Orthodox Jews, we have a particular connection to our authentic chain of transmission, to our Masorah, and that guides and leads us in the decisions that we make and the way in which we recommend leading our life as Jewish people. There may be other religious leaders who don't always rely on the right sources and don't always reach the right conclusions, and so could be misleading their entire communities to do things which by Torah standards are forbidden, but which they may have ruled are actually permitted. So one has to be extremely careful, because people's lives are in your hands. People's the way they practice, it's in your hands. And that's not necessarily relevant just to how we paskin halacha, how we rule Jewish law. It's relevant in the way that we counsel people and give people advice. If we are self-proclaimed experts and actually we might be completely misinformed, you run the risk of that leaving a remnant of damage on whoever it is that you're influencing. So I believe that's pretty much the crux of what Rabbi Yehuda is emphasizing over here. Rabbi Yehuda, by the way, before I open the floor for comments and questions, Rabbi Yehuda, as I said, he is well known throughout the Talmud. He's quoted everywhere. And there's an amazing story of... sorry, it's not Rabbi Yehuda. What am I talking about? But there's an amazing story about this rabbi who was a incredibly proficient Torah scholar. And he was giving a class one day to his students, and he proved using 15 different sources that actually chametz is permitted to eat on Pesach. And the logic that he applied and his arguments They were so convincing. And he turned to his class afterwards and he said, so come on, guys, who can disprove me? I've given you 15 proofs here that you're allowed to eat chametz on Pesach. Who can prove me wrong? And everyone's thinking, gosh, like, these arguments are watertight. We can't figure out how to break this logic. And they're umming and ahhing, and eventually the rabbi turns to them and says, because it says in the verse, you shall not eat chametz on Pesach. That was all that was needed. So, you know, it's possible with great intellectual prowess to come up to all kinds of conclusions and all kinds of ideas, and they may completely fly in the face of what the Torah was intending, but the logic is so watertight. But actually, if the Torah told us something and it was explicit in a particular way, then no amount of intellectual prowess is going to be enough to uproot what the Torah had in mind. So that's important to bear in mind. And you know, certainly with the amount of resources that are available online and the ease with which we can access websites and articles written by people who sometimes take and skew authentic Torah ideas and to take it in completely wrong directions, ways which would be in violation of what God and the Torah had intended. So one has to be very careful with these things, because you can lead people down the wrong path. There was actually a sacrifice that was brought in the temple anytime the Beit Din had erroneously made a ruling, or Kohen Gadol had erroneously made a ruling. So anytime they got it wrong and people ended up acting on that advice and on that counsel, but it was halachically wrong, so there was a sacrifice that was brought on behalf of the community for when those mistakes were made. So that means as well we have to have the intellectual honesty to own up when we make those mistakes and when we get things wrong. So that's all part of that picture. Honesty, care, realizing how much of an impact we have on those around us. These are all immensely important things. Paul, over to you.
I read it completely differently. Very interesting. You've read it, and I absolutely agree with everything you're saying, but you've read it as a person, maybe a rabbi or whatever, who gives out the wrong information and guides people in the wrong way. I read it completely differently. I read it that for someone who does not have the knowledge of a rabbi, who is therefore studying, if they make an error in their study, it counts as a deliberate sin, which I was about to poke my hand up and say, if it's an error, it can't be a deliberate sin. A deliberate sin must know what the correct path argument was, and then deliberately go in a different direction. And then if it's an error, it's because the person didn't know and they were still studying the right answer. So it seems to me that this is a bit of a this is more complex, if you like.
I don't believe that we are saying that if a person does something by accident, certainly someone that you wouldn't have expected to know better. You know, I would say like this: if it was someone who you would expect to know better, you know, if the rabbi is studying, and you would expect the rabbi to reach the right conclusion, and there they make.
It doesn't go that far. It says only about. It doesn't come into conclusion. It only comes into for an error in study. The fact that they're studying might mean that they don't know the conclusion. But there's nothing here about studying it and then coming to the wrong conclusion. I was reading it that if for an error in study, Nebuch, the poor guy studying and studying because he don't know the answer, he's made a mistake inadvertently, and now he's actually got a deliberate sin as well as got the wrong answer. I mean, he didn't have a good morning, this guy.
No, and I don't believe that is what Rabbi Yehuda is trying to teach us. You don't.
Thank you for explaining it, because it's easy to misunderstand.
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, we have principles that we are familiar with in modern times, gross negligence and tort law and all of these areas where there's an expectation that somebody will have a level of competence that if they then miss the mark, then it has, damaging impact. And I think that really is that's really the thrust of
That
where
you think is
Rabbi
what he's getting at.
Yeah, I don't believe that he's saying that if you read a book and the book says, don't turn on the lights on Shabbos, whatever it is, yeah? And then you read that and then you accidentally go and turn on the light. I don't think it's saying that becomes a... Or you read it and you think, oh, yeah, the book actually said that you're allowed to do this. I don't believe that that's what it's saying. An error is an error and deliberate is deliberate. I don't think it's...
put it both in the same sentence. It sounds wrong, doesn't it? It sounds like the translation isn't what... It's one of these things where the translation's not correct.
Well,
you can't be deliberate and make an error.
Yes, it's one of those things where, and this, by the way, is why we have had so many rabbis who comment on these Mishnayos and who offer the, help us navigate how to understand them. The commentaries that I've seen were all interpreting this in the sense of being careful with how one transmits the messages of the things that they learn. That would go in a personal level as well. One still personally has to be paying attention and being careful and being meticulous with the things that they read and being sure to understand what they're reading. It's something that we have to take care with.
Rabbi, what would the crown of royalty mean?
Well, we haven't got there yet. That is a separate Mishnah in my book. So we'll come to that in one second. Joy.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's a sort of passive or active thing, because if it's a passive thing, then it means be careful and study, a bit like Paul just said, because if you study the wrong way or incorrectly or misinterpret, it could be, or it does, count as a deliberate sin. But if it's an active thing, be careful in teaching, transmitting, somebody else is studying. It seems to me that those two words are wrong, and I find it. I initially, before you explained it, found it really misleading because it didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does it make a little bit more sense now?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, wonderful.
Why though, Rabbi? Why was Rabbi Judah unable to put it into plain Hebrew that's understandable? It seems strange.
Are you sure that it's not Rabbi Nick who has a problem putting it into plain English?
Rabbi,
No.
Rabbi, Rita speaking. What's the Hebrew word for deliberate?
Zadon.
Is that deliberate in Hebrew?
Pardon me, sorry?
Is that in Hebrew?
Yes, Zadon. When we say that a person did an action b'mezid, which is the same root, they have done something willfully and intentionally. But when someone does something b'shogeg, right, which is that word there, shigagat Talmud, when a person does something by accident, mistakenly, so for example, a person may eat a piece of meat that was not kosher because they thought it was kosher. So there's a piece of beef and they thought it was kosher beef and they ate it, but actually it was non-kosher beef. So they have acted mistakenly, erroneously. Or if a person ate a piece of meat from a non-kosher butcher, but they thought, well, it's beef. Beef is kosher, so I'm allowed to eat it. So they didn't realize that there's such a thing as non-kosher beef. Then they're also acting erroneously. If a person knows that there's such a thing as kosher beef and that one can only get it from a kosher source, then if the person was to eat non-kosher beef, then they could be acting willfully and intentionally because they know that it's not kosher, they know that they're not supposed to eat it, and then they're doing it anyway.
Isn't that an error in their life rather than an error in study?
There can be additional factors. Yeah, go on. What do you mean, Paul?
Well, again, you're taking it round to exercises that happen in one's life. If you deliberately ate the meat knowing it was non-kosher, it would be a different thing from eating the meat if you didn't know it was non-kosher.
Right.
Even that's not a good way of looking at it. But here, it seems very clear that Rabbi Judah was very straightforward with this. Please be careful when you study, because when you study, if you make an error in studying, it will count as a deliberate sin. And I'm still having a problem just looking at the writing as opposed to, I'm sure thousands of rabbis have been reading this over the year and given their explanations the same as you have, which is interesting, but it's an explanation to a different problem. I mean, it's a great explanation, but it's not for this. Surely just reading it, if it be carefully studied, because if you make an error, which obviously by the definition, an error is unavoidable.
One could say then that the error that you make in your study and the negligence, if one negligently did not pay enough attention to what they were studying, to the point then that they now have a different version of truth, then when you act on that version of truth, maybe that could be considered as deliberate violation.
And I'd go with that. Or if one hasn't got a teacher of sufficiently high standard, thinking back to some of the ones that we did earlier, that one should choose a teacher and sit at his feet, etc., etc.
Yeah.
If you chose a bad teacher, or one that was consistently drunk after Kiddush, you would be making an error in doing such a thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. So let's carry on then with this Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer. This is I actually had a hard time preparing material for this because I have used this Mishnah at so many shiva houses with the quick 2-minute explanation that it was actually difficult to open my mind to think beyond the 2-minute interpretation that I use at shiva houses. So,
but it's very clear.
Oh, is it? Oh, wonderful. Take us through it then, Paul. Go on. 3 crowns.
There are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah and studying Torah and that sort of thing, the crown of priesthood, devoting oneself to priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the crown of a good name supersedes them all.
So this is very, very straightforward.
It's, if it means what it says, which these usually don't, then it's pretty straightforward.
So do you want to take us through it a little bit? Do you want to take us through it a little bit? What are we teaching?
Are they physical crowns? Because it seems to me they're talking about 3 crowns, and they do mention the crown of Torah, because you could think of the crown of the Torah scroll, the crown of priesthood, which is his hat, and the crown of royalty, which is a crown. But the crown of the good name, which isn't actually, is not a real thing, and also it's not part of the 3 crowns, it's a 4th. It's not tangible. You could take it like that. I suspect it's not how one should take it.
I thought he was talking about the 3 crowns next to the shul.
I think they got their name from the Mishnah. We could go next door and ask them what their 3 crowns are.
Yeah, the crown of royalty, though, what does that refer to? Because I can understand the crown of Torah, having achieved the crown of Torah, achieved the crown of priesthood, because to me this is all that he's talking to students, people studying Torah. That's how I would read it. But I don't, and the crown of a good name supersedes them all, which I understand. But I don't know what you would class as royalty.
King David.
Rabbi, is the crown of a good name? Sorry, yeah. Is the crown of a good name? Is that us, the Jewish people?
It could be, yeah. Talk me through it, Rita. At the moment, we're just throwing things out there, so tell us what your thoughts are.
I agree with, like I said, straightforward. All the crowns are straightforward, but the last one means now I haven't got a crown. I have to work myself up to be a good person, have a good name.
Very good. I mean, I'm amazed that no one remembers this. My explanation from Shiva houses. I mean, I don't know if I should be. I'm almost sure I'll have used it at some point when you guys have been around. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about it. Let's start with, are these physical crowns? So these don't necessarily seem to be physical crowns. I definitely love what Joy was saying. All of these things do have physical crowns. It wasn't something that I had necessarily thought of. But they all are in some way. A king has his crown. The Torah has its crown. The Kohanim have their crown. The Kohen Gadol has his turban with the head plate on it. So yeah, they do in some way have a physical dimension to them. And the crown of a good name does not seem to have it. We don't come to people and say, here is your crown of a good name. So that doesn't have a tangible aspect. But the truth is, the Mishnah is driving at, there are three, I guess, positions of privilege, as it were, which a person can come across. And it's interesting to consider whether these are things that we can earn or whether things that we are given. So fundamentally, the way that I often interpret this is in the following way. The crown of Torah is essentially available to anyone born as a Jew. Right? It's your birthright to be able to have the crown of Torah. The crown of Kahuna is going to be available to anyone born as a Kohen. So that's also a birthright. That's also something that is taken out of your hands. Keter Malchut, the crown of kingship, of royalty, is anybody descended from King David is in that lineage of royalty. That's from birth as well. But there's only one thing that, as Rita was saying, that we can work on for ourselves. Only one that we can earn. We're not born with a good name. We earn a good name. And that perhaps is why it supersedes them all. Oh, hello, Gary. And that perhaps is why it supersedes them all, because it's not your birthright. It's not your privilege. It's something that you earn from a lifetime of investment and from a lifetime of effort. So that's when it comes to a 2-minute Shiva Dvar Torah, where we're trying to study a Mishnah and come out with meaning that we can take from a Shiva house and connect it to a loved one who has passed from the world and the legacy that they leave behind. So it for me, it's always been a perfect message there that we. Welcome, Martin, as well.
Apologies, my wife had to go to the hospital today, and I just followed her up.
We wish her well. We wish her well. Hope everything's okay. So the crown of a good name comes from a lifetime of effort and of investment and building relationships and working hard. And then when a person leaves this world, they can only hope that they have acquired the crown of a good name, that everyone will look at them and look back at them and have memories of them, of how good they were and everything that they contributed. That for me has always been a lovely take-home message.
Rabbi? Yeah. It reminds me very much of the story where the gentleman who died there's really anything good that the rabbi was able to say about him. There was really nothing. Mm-hmm. But they were at the Shiva, and what they said was that his brother apparently was even worse.
Yeah. I've heard that joke as well. We can all only hope that we pass from this world leaving behind the crown of a good name, or having acquired the crown of a good name. There are a couple of other things though that I was able to explore with all of this. By the way, the Keter Kahuna, it's a little bit deeper than just to say that you've been born into the priestly line, born as a descendant of a Kohen, of Aaron, a Kohen ultimately. But it does have certain privileges. A Kohen gets called up first to the Torah. They're invited to lead the benching. They are, there's a biblical mitzvah for all of us to honor and prioritize a kohen. So there is an element of prestige to that particular position. So that's worthwhile pointing out, that we actually have a positive mitzvah in the Torah, biblical mandate to give honor to kohanim. When it comes to the laws of lashon hara, very interestingly, you can. There are different numbers of mitzvot that you could be violating by speaking lashon hara about someone. So let's say you spoke about. Let's just say, for example, that there was one mitzvah that you could violate by speaking about someone. There isn't. There are more, but let's just say that that there was one. So if you spoke about a kohen, that would now be 2. If you spoke about an elderly kohen, that would then be 3, because there's a separate mitzvah to give honor to elderly people, and you'd be violating that by speaking lashon hara. So the point is that there is a level of prestige to a kohen that practically we need to be aware of, and practically we need to take on board. So nonetheless, though, these first 3 crowns, they all seem to be gifts. And we can look at them in a slightly different way as well. So the Keter Torah is the crown of wisdom, the crown of Torah, which again is God-given. Priesthood, we said, is a familial inheritance. When it comes to kingship and wealth, so for some reason the commentaries were associating kingship and wealth together. So it could be that within this Keter of Malchut, it's not just about being descended from King David, but it could be that there's an element there of a certain level of prestige from being in a position of wealth, which one also would be divinely given and not just earned. But the ability to earn your good name, that is truly yours. That no one can take that away from you. That is something that we earn, and that's why perhaps that this Mishnah says that it supersedes all 3 of the other things. One other interesting thing that I saw is that these 3 crowns, the Keter of Torah, the Keter of Kahuna, the Keter of Malchut, the Keter of Torah, priesthood and royalty and monarchy, these mirror and parallel the 3 things that we said way back when that the world stands on. We said the world stands on Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. So they mention that there's a parallel between these things, that the crown of Torah is parallels Torah, the crown of priesthood parallels Avodah, because the service in the temple was performed by priests, by Kohanim, and when it comes to the crown of royalty, excuse me, when it comes to the crown of royalty, to be a melech in Judaism doesn't mean that you sit on your throne and you act as a dictator and act as a tyrant to your people. The role of a king in Judaism is to spread your generosity, spread the light of Hashem throughout the whole kingdom. I guess if we could perhaps summarize it in that way. The role of a king is not to be, someone in the background. You're supposed to be leading from the front and leading by example and raising the moral level of the nation through your actions. So that is why perhaps it's paralleled with kindness, Gemilut Chasadim, because as a king, with all of the power and the forces at your disposal, you have the opportunity there to spread the chesed and to spread the love and to spread the kindness throughout the world with your actions. So that's something else that I was seeing. Yeah,
I find it most surprising. If you've never read this, and somebody today said that a crown of a good name supersedes the crown of studying Torah, I should imagine that person will probably be shocked. And yet, reading it here, I find it very difficult to believe that the crown of a good name, even at this point, this Rabbi Shimon believes that it is more important than Torah, more important than priesthood and royalty. I'm not so hot on, but certainly just the Torah. It's a very, very strong thing to say. I'm surprised other rabbis would agree with that, because it sounds like something that could have plenty of people disagreeing with that.
So what answer would you give to that?
Well, I have an answer, as usual. It doesn't mean you don't study Torah, but it means there's no point in studying Torah if you haven't got a good name.
Oh.
If you don't use it well, then it's useless. So a good name is... It's more important to have a little Torah and a good name than a lot of Torah and do nothing with it.
That is a beautiful answer. It's one that came across as well, which is that, you know, you could be the greatest rabbi, you could be a Kohen Gadol and be completely devoid of any morality. That in the Second Temple, people used to give bribes to be appointed as the Kohen Gadol. So all of these positions, even though they have their crowns, they're positions of prestige, and they're in the spotlight, and everyone thinks that they're amazing. If they're not backed up by being a good person, and if your actions and if your inside are not reflective of the stature that you have been divinely given, then they are, you know, insignificant. I don't know if that's the right word. But
you're saying that the crown of a good name has to be in line with the other three crowns. I read it that you can have those other three crowns, but the crown of a good name supersedes them all. So you didn't require to be a king or a priest. But you see what I mean?
It doesn't say 4 crowns, and yet they talk about a crown of a good name supersedes. There are 3 crowns, it says.
It can't supersede.
And it talks about 4 crowns. It says there are 3 crowns, but the crown of a good name, which is a 4th crown, supersedes all the others. So it's saying you've got to have that 4th one is part of the 3. It's not 4.
Yeah, but I can't become royalty.
Each one has to have a good name.
I can't
Otherwise, it would say there are 4 crowns. If it was like you think, they would say there are 4 crowns, but it doesn't. It says there are 3 crowns, and yet it mentions 4. So I always read it. That 4th one is part of every one of the other 3. It's only 3.
Yeah.
But that 4th one is part of it.
It justifies the other 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I can't become royalty, and unfortunately I can't become into the priesthood. The only thing I can do is
you can become a Talmud Chacham.
Well, one could argue that by the very fact that we're born Jewish means that we have a portion of that crown of Torah.
Yes.
That we have that crown.
But it's less important than the crown of a good name.
I certainly see why you're going down that route. But I think certainly the primary interpretation would be that with all of these things, you could have someone who devotes their lives by having these crowns, and you know, it's like walking around with a paper crown if you don't have the good name as well. It's part and parcel of the package.
Yeah, I was thinking of it slightly from the other way, from someone who doesn't have Torah, isn't a king, and isn't in the priesthood. That person, not having the 3 crowns, is still able to have a good name, to live a good life, to do the things in the family for the children or whatever.
Yeah.
And that actually supersedes, in Hashem's eyes, the previous 3. You're looking at it differently saying that the first three, this is what you also have to do, but it doesn't use the word also. And I think coming back to translations,
I guess it just doesn't sit well with me to walk away saying that that a person that all they need to do is be whatever version of a good person they think it means to be a good person, and that's all a person needs to do in life. That tends to not sit well with me, because I think it's part of a bigger picture.
But isn't having a good name?
Yeah.
Having a mixture of all the other crowns as well in making and having that good name. Because in having a good name, you are following the Torah, which is not just studying but doing good things and charitable things, and the priesthood and royalty. If you are, but even if you're not, the fact is that a mixture of those is what gives you the good name.
It's possible, but if you're not born a Kohen, then how do you get the crown of priesthood?
Yeah.
But yeah, go on,
Yeah, you know, we're talking about being given or inheriting the Torah and the crown of priesthood, but you can't give yourself a good name. It's got to be given. Right. It's got to be the opinion and the feelings of others that you have deserved this goodness,
this accolade.
Thank you.
On a last word, Rabbi, could I say that the reason we use this so much, the reason you use it so much in a shiva, is for exactly the reason that it is so comforting to be able to say to the family that regardless of the fact that the poor person who's died was not a king or a priest, he actually did have a brilliant crown of a good name, which actually supersedes them all. And isn't that why you use it? Because he's so comforting to the wife or the husband or the family.
Yes.
He was a good man, he had a good name.
Yes,
he didn't study Torah all day long or whatever it is that he should have done. But you know what? It's a lovely thing to say to a family, even if he wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the only thing that I was taking issue is when we kind of take a perspective of like, so I don't actually need to ever study about Judaism because I'll just work on having a good name, and that's it. And that's where I kind of like slightly.
Well, if you think about it further than that, if one was wanting to go down that road, you could think, not to worry, that's exactly the road I'll go down, because I know when the rabbi comes to the shiva and I'm brown bread, he will say that I was a good man and I actually see. I mean, but you are obviously right. I'm sorry.
No,
I totally accept what you're saying.
It's all part of a picture, isn't it? And it's all part of a journey. So yeah. All right. As far as the recording goes, guys, that's all we've got time for. Let's say goodbye to everyone on YouTube and Facebook, and wish everyone a wonderful, meaningful day. A Freilichen Purim, a happy, joyous, and meaningful Purim. And we'll see you all next time on Lunch and Learn.